Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement, The Complete Armorer's Handbook, designed by Heavyarms for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons Andrew, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, Chris, Alberto, Manuel, and Basil. And gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos Dade, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean AK, Cert2B, Adam, Deathers Lion, Sam, Arash, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. Something that the designer says early on in this supplement is something that I have also kind of realized is a problem with any RPG where you want to have your character's backstory, or starting out at level 1, involve some kind of special heirloom or some kind of special piece of equipment. So for example, your your mother's spell book, or your grandfather's sword, you've taken up the mantle and now you're going to adventure with the sword. But then you go and do a few adventures, have a few sessions, you level up a bit, you find some generic +1 sword, and then it's, sorry, Grandpa, you're stowing that sword away and you're never going to use it again because the +1 sword is better. So how do we get around the fact that, and D&D 5e is not nearly as loot-centric as previous versions of D&D, which I have mixed feelings about, but you still run into that issue. So what this supplement does, I was going to say attempt to do, but it does, is provide rules for upgrading weapons and armor. Not magical ones, although you could apply this to magic. This is designed for more common items and would especially be good for a low magic system, except that's only half the supplement. The other half is infusing weapons with runic rune stones, which basically, if you've played a Diablo-style game, would be like you slotting gems in there to give them new abilities. So it's kind of a 2-in-1 supplement. It's exceptionally well done. It's absolutely beautifully laid out. The presentation is extremely professional. It's gorgeous to look at and read. And it's very well developed. I was extremely impressed by especially the multiple appendices at the end, which have design tables and notes and even a frequently asked questions page of well, why did you decide to do this? That's absolutely amazing. It anticipates all the follow-up questions. I think it's extremely well built. We're going to go over it because it's also not that long, which is kind of refreshing. I love this little tabs, by the way, at the side. I never usually see that, but it has little... and again, it's not that long. The whole thing is less than 30 pages, but we get little tab indentations here on the side. So it talks about game balance. It talks about how it kind of redesigned some of the equipment by using tags. And tags are, again, kind of from a Diablo point of view. In Diablo, you've got it's the bloody bat of the snake or something, and all those tags mean different things. So in this case, you can upgrade your armor to give them the breathable tag, or give it a climbing harness, or the muffled tag, or runic, which will then allow it to have runes that can be slotted into it to then grant new abilities. All these things cost money. There's no level requirement. There's no class requirement or anything like that. Some of them do have certain requisites for certain kinds of armor, so that does exist. It's a loud truck goes by. But it's all just money based, and the designer even mentions that also in the frequently asked questions, why use this, and how do you come up with the design, all that. And I think using a lot of the rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide and from Xanathar's, you can kind of piece together, as well as just experience playing D&D, how much money these things require. And another big issue with D&D 5e is how there doesn't appear to be enough of a money sink. Players gain a lot of money. Now, granted, you could be doing the lifestyle stuff, and you're paying however much money to stay at an inn, but it doesn't scale. You're getting just so much money by the time you get into tier 2 and tier 3 that you could live in the life of luxury. And I mean, most adventurers would probably retire after 5th level, because you've made enough money where you can buy and sell whole kingdoms, which is bizarre. But so anyway, not to go off on a rant about the money system in D&D, but this provides a nice money sink, which is very useful. So it gives players something to actually spend their money on to make themselves better, which, from me coming from a video game background is exactly what I'm looking for. Money, you just throw it on the pile. But if I can actually spend that money on things that make my character stronger, now I'm excited. Now I'm getting interested in actually getting money so I can spend it on those things. And then it lets you keep your items, which is kind of nice. And in this case, there's even a variant where you can do armor proofing, which kind of gets a little bit complicated with the rules that I don't believe anything in D&D 5e has damage reduction. In terms of like armor has like straight up reduces damage by this much. Armor class in D&D is purely hit and miss, from what I understand. There's no like damage mitigation there. And this adds a system where you can have damage reduction. I keep using different terms because there's different terms for it. Or it says as a variant you can just have it be +1 armor class, which is probably the way to go about it. But even then, so you could take your beloved armor that you've got, and so you've got this perfect set of armor that's from your backstory, or it's all decorated in a certain way, then you can just spend the money. Now there's rules about how long it takes and you have to be in town for so long, but I think that's a really cool idea. You can just spend the money to upgrade it and maybe give it some other little bells and whistles. And same thing for weapons. It rebalances a few of the weapons by giving them different properties. There's like a siege property where it does more damage to objects and structures. Limited, which means that object is like illegal at the hand crossbow, which I think is pretty funny. And then you can give it a bunch of upgrades, which are organized by tiers. And you can have multiples of the tiers, but every time you use one, the next one costs double in price, which kind of reminds me of Gloomhaven. Gloomhaven has this exact same concept with enhancing your ability cards. You can do it for whatever the cost is. But then if you want to enhance that card again, it suddenly starts costing exponentially more. I think it literally just doubles. I'd have to remember what the Gloomhaven enhancement rules are, but I think that's a good place to start. And it feels pretty well balanced. There's some nifty abilities. You can add the fact that you can get crits on either a 19 or 20, or even go lower than that, go 18 to 20, and keep getting those bonuses. Obviously, you can enchant things to get +1s. You can add additional damage. And there's a neat thing at the end where it talks about how a lot of these weapon abilities, for example, the dagger has the most amount of abilities that can be applied because there's a sawtoothed ability that can only be applied to daggers specifically with the sharpened tag. And the designer even states, I did this on purpose because daggers are so terribly underused despite them being such an iconic weapon for NPCs and for PCs like rogues to use. But they're so terrible, it's a D4, nobody in their right mind is going to bother using a dagger once they have access, which you do at level 1, to get a better, like a rapier is a classic finesse weapon that everybody uses for that reason. So I think that's a really cool way of bringing things like a dagger into play and making people more excited about using those kind of weapons because you can add these kind of tags. So I think it's a really cool system, and it smartly doesn't add a whole lot of complexity to it. Again, everything just has a cost to upgrade, and it's got a pretty easy property to understand. It's all either +1s, or you add the ability to add a rune on there. You can, or for armor you can add +1, or you can add it eliminates the disadvantage on stealth, for example. It just works really well, and I really like this system. We also get at the end some special ammunition types. This is really fun if you've got somebody, obviously, who's a ranger or a bow user. I really like the Berserk Dart. If any video game gives me a chance to ranged attack somebody that makes them turn on their ally, or a special ability that allows an enemy to turn on their own allies, that's always an ability I go after because that's incredibly useful. So Sleep Darts and Berserk Darts. Suddenly, somebody with a freaking blow dart gun is doing cool stuff with it, which I think is really fun. Different kinds of arrows that all make sense. So Broadhead does more damage if people aren't wearing armor. Bodkin does more damage if people are wearing armor. All that seems to work pretty well. And again, they have got really fun costs, which is a useful cost sink because I think D&D 5e definitely needs that kind of thing there. It also has an optional rule for using wear and tear to your armor as well as repairing said armor. This is not something I don't think I would use in my games personally because it's just kind of an extra thing that I wouldn't want to keep up with. But if you're playing a more gritty or low magic world, I could definitely see where this would be a even more you, and if you're keeping track of rations and a lot of things that I don't keep track of in my game, you could keep track of armor degradation and then let players have to repair that stuff, and that incurs another money cost. So again, more of a money sink, which can be very useful. So that's just half of it. All of that, which I think is enough for one supplement, frankly, because it's all very well done and the rules are all very clear, is just one half. And then the second half is these rune stones, which are adding one ability to a weapon or armor. Now, that weapon or armor has to have the runic tag on there. And it even says, feel free to give them, weapons that aren't magical but have those tags. And then if you want to create your own magic weapon using this system, just create a weapon that already has, one or two of the base tags, so it's serrated or whatever else, and then it's got runic on there, and then you can already have it with a runestone. So boom, you've got suddenly a magic item. I believe they do all require attunement once you've got the runestone. And I think, so there are rules for making your own runestone, but I think if you just find a runestone, and as long as the weapon is, or piece of armor has runic on, as a tag, then I believe you can just slot it right in. I couldn't find any other rules about needing to pay somebody or needing to make a check to actually attach, to slot the runestone into the item. However, there are extensive rules for making your own runestones, and there are nearly 40 of these. I think I literally counted 38 or 39 runestones, and they all have pretty cool abilities. I have to look up my notes. There they are. So Earthshake gives you a once per day use of Earthquake. Mariner, you have no disadvantage when using the weapon underwater, because usually most weapons you incur disadvantage. Overshield is really cool for a piece of armor. At the start of each of your turns, you gain 8 temporary hit points. Phoenix is pretty nuts. When you drop to 0 hit points, you cast Fireball centered on yourself, and then you heal 1d6 hit points. Obviously very appropriate for a Phoenix. So just a lot of really cool abilities. Some of them are utility. Most of them are designed for combat specifically, because you're slotting them into armor and weapons. In fact, I would have loved to see this even taken a step further and had a whole nother slot for rings or amulet or something that would be purely stuff that was more utility based, whereas these are almost entirely combat. There's a knock spell you get for one of them, but most of them are more combat based, which makes sense because again we're dealing with weapons and armor. So it's a neat system with creating your own runestones. This one goes really far into it. There's a whole runesmith's guild based in Neverwinter. You have to pay to take a class essentially, and then you make a skill check, and the DC depends on what level class you want to take, and then that allows you to then craft that level of runestone. And the runestones are all done the same rarity level as magic items, so common, uncommon, rare, very rare, and legendary. And most of them fall, as you can see, between uncommon, rare, and very rare, which definitely seems to make the most sense. So it's a neat system. Obviously you can ignore that completely and still use runestones if you just want to have them be loot out in the world, which I think is a cool idea for loot, because it gives the players, let's say they find I don't know, what's a good example, kind of a generic, you could give them the just the warrior rune, which is while you're wielding the weapon you can't be disarmed while you are conscious. That's not hugely powerful, but you can give the party a warrior rune, and then they can of course fight over who's going to do it, and then they have to have their weapon already have the runic tag on there in order to equip it, but that would be a bit of a time, or not a time sink, a money sink to get the weapon upgrade, which is only 100 gold. So it's only 100 gold to go. I mean, it does say buy a runesmith, but you're the DM, you could put your runesmith wherever you want. To apply a runic tag to a weapon, and then you can apply any runestone to it. Now, there is a rule where I think you can only have the one runestone, and if you unslot it, it destroys that runestone. But again, DM, you can make whatever choice you want. I think it's a fun system. It's definitely taken from video game stuff like Diablo, which I really like. And I like that it works well in D&D 5e. It doesn't overcomplicate things. None of these abilities are very complex. They're all drawn from abilities and things that are already in D&D. I like the huge number of runestones that we get, and I think it's fun that you even have a chance to create your own, but you could just use them as loot out in the world. So big thumbs up for runestones and big thumbs up for the first half as well. And then, as I mentioned at the beginning, the appendices section is amazing. You get this detailed weapon upgrade analysis, which, as somebody who's very much not a math person, this part kind of flew over my head, but I appreciate the design notes, which essentially works through the designer's process of, okay, here's how I balanced everything out. Here's the average damage for the top tier weapons. For those of you that are really min-maxing and wanting to get the most possible damage, and I know you're out there, you're probably watching this video, here is why I came up to this conclusion, and here are what the numbers mean. So I think it's very appreciative, even for me who really gets scared about looking at that many numbers and just kind of wants to trust the person that they did the work. I can look at this and say, okay, you did the work. Like, you did the math, you broke everything down. And, as a player, you can hand this to the DM and be like, look, this isn't really going to imbalance anything. And in point of fact, it might actually improve the balance level. For example, allow a player to use a dagger way more often than they would something else, with the fact that a dagger could potentially become a really exceptionally powerful weapon if they sink enough money into it. It would have to cost literally thousands, if not, you can see tens of thousands of gold to get it the absolute best maximum possible, whatever. But I think that's a neat idea, and I really love seeing that here, and it goes really, really far into it. I mean, a reference chart here, and I love the fact at the end, which, again, explains all the different things that the players would have, any of the questions they would have. How can I make my magic weapons upgradable? And it uses the Dagger of Venom as an example of working backwards. Okay, here's how you actually use this system to build a Dagger of Venom. And then if you build it this way, then if it's got the runic tag and it's got the silvered and the magical tags, balanced and wounding tags, it's got all these things built into it. Now your players could take that and then upgrade it, and then it's like identifying that weapon and seeing all the individual tags that make up that weapon. Literally, you're just turning your magic items into Diablo-style loot of having all these different modifiers, which is, I think, a really, really fun system. But if you wanted to, your players don't have to engage with it that much, and you can just use it as a DM to build different kinds of magical weapons, or common weapons that are a little more powerful than normal common weapons, but aren't quite as powerful as straight up magic weapons that they find in the Dungeon Masters Guild, for example. Alright, let's go over my pros and cons for the Complete Armorer's Handbook. Pros, beautiful, professional layout and presentation. I didn't even talk about that, but just flipping through it, you can see just how gorgeous this thing looks. There's tons of art, sidebars, all the tables. I mean, it looks like it is professionally done by Wizards of the Coast, which I think is very high praise, because I think their books look very good. Pro, over 25 weapon and armor upgrades and 7 new types of ammunition. Lots of good upgrade options. Pro, optional rules for special materials and repairing worn equipment. Not stuff that I would probably use, but it's really nice to see. Pro, nearly 40 runestones that can be slotted into weapons and armor to add new effects. Obviously, the runestones are very cool. Pro, rules for joining the Runesmiths Guild and crafting your own runestones. And pro, appendices featuring design notes, reference tables, and a FAQ. I never get a FAQ. That's awesome. That was a lot of pros. Cons? I got nothing. No cons. I got no complaints. It's a really, really awesome supplement. I mean, it does everything that it sets out to do and does it really, really well. I honestly have no complaints about it. Final verdict, with well-developed rules for weapon and armor upgrades, a runic system for enchanting equipment, and a gorgeous professional layout, the Complete Armorer's Handbook is one of the most impressive and useful supplements on the DM's Guild. Thank you, everyone, for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.